Where did you think babies came from before you actually found out? Story 1. I thought they sort of just, grew, I guess. I didn't put much thought into my theory XD I knew about pregnancy early on, but no, of course what leads to pregnancy. So I thought the baby was sort of like a plant, and people just sort of appeared, I think, XD. Answer. That was my thought too when I was really young. I remember the moment the logic caught up to me clearly. I was at a wedding, watching the vows be exchanged, and I was like, so now they can have a baby. Wait a second, how does that work anyway? Does it just spontaneously start growing? But that doesn't make sense. Some people have kids without marrying. And how does the father get involved? My parents decided to give me the talk several days later. They knew if they didn't seriously answer the question, I would find the answer myself. Story 2. I thought they came from dancing. Hear me out. Watch too many Bollywood movies, and when guy meets girl, they have a song of their own and dance to it, and boom, cut to them having a baby. I always thought if I dance with a guy I like, I'll have one. Story 3. My parents told me storks came and dropped off babies, but I thought that was made up by cartoons, so I borrowed my oldest sister's health class textbook. I never had time to really wonder and make something up in my head, because storks didn't make any sense to me, so I immediately went, birds, that doesn't make sense, to, yes, now I know about intimacy, in the span of 5 days. I think I even had my big sister explain it to me because her health textbook was pretty vague. Story 4. I was told that God gives married couples a baby when they're ready. So I thought Jesus was just going around immaculate, conceptioning people left and right. You just be minding your own business and then wake up one day and bam, preggers. I was genuinely terrified as a kid that I would become pregnant due to Jesus magic. And during my nightly prayers, I asked him very sincerely to please not make me pregnant because I was very busy with being a first grader. And I was simply not ready for all that. Of course, I was told God could only give you a baby if you're married, but I thought that didn't make a whole lot of sense because God could do whatever he wants, and what if he wanted me, age 6, to be pregnant? Anyway, I made it to adulthood without becoming the next Virgin Mary, so clearly my childhood prayers worked. Checkmate, atheists. Story 5. I always knew that they came out of mommy's tummy, was never clear exactly how. But my first belief was that it was something that just happened automatically, shortly after getting married. But because I was a very inquisitive little kid and asked a lot of questions about things I'd seen insects doing, I found out that daddies had to attach themselves to mommies and transmit special cells to them in order for babies to be made. But since I had no sisters and had never seen any little girls naked, I didn't know about the different body parts. So I deduced that some belly buttons were innies and some were outies because they needed to fit together to make babies. So if you wanted to have babies, you needed to marry someone who had the opposite belly button type from you. So between then and when I finally learned the truth about anatomy a couple of years later, I called belly buttons breeding buttons. Story 6. I genuinely believed that you just got pregnant randomly when you got older, so I was petrified of the idea of being pregnant BC. I thought I didn't have a choice when it happened and my body would just decide. When I learned I did, in fact, have a choice, it was like my world shattered. XD. Story 7. They spawned on the bed they got delivered on the doorstep. You picked them up from the hospital they spawn in mother's womb after marriage. After going through all these stages, I now finally know the real truth that babies are grown on trees. Story 8. My mom said they come from the stomach. Obviously that's true, but I didn't understand the significance of the question. I had only heard other kids ask that on TV without realizing what I was asking. Later, when introduced to the concept of intimacy leading to pregnancy, I was like, oh. Once I had that figured out, I thought they just came out of the butt. Wasn't until my friends laughed at me on the phone when I casually mentioned it that I had the full picture. Story 9. I knew they came out of the mother's womb after growing in there, but I thought the priest said magic words at the wedding that started the whole process. And by trying, I was not so sure what they meant exactly. And that single motherhood happened when the magic words struck the wrong person. Hence, at a very young age, I did play Home for Single Mothers with some of my dolls a few times. Yes, I had a big imagination and a big heart. I hope I still do. I was told the exact mechanism around age 9. I knew all other aspects of growing up and puberty and the sort, though I would turn out to be a late bloomer, so all but one of my classmates went through it before I did. Comprehensive intimacy education is an absolute must, and it needs to start young. Story 10. I thought a couple had to get married, and when they sealed the deal with a kiss, a baby would magically appear in the mother's stomach at any random time. Then I thought a slide would appear in the middle of the stomach, and the baby would slide out. My mom did not correct me. Story 11. I knew they came from people. I had a babysitter who got pregnant when I was 34-ish, and she straight up told my sister and I there was a baby in her stomach when she showed up all swollen one day. I couldn't figure out how the baby got in her stomach until years later, though. Story 12. I was taught they were developed in the mom's belly after doing things with a man. Yeah, I was taught immediately, LOL, but I also thought we could buy babies, so I often asked my mom to buy me a sister, haha. Story 13. I played Sims 4 on an iPad before I got the talk, and when I pressed the woohoo option when I tried to get my sim to get with someone, or if they had someone, it would just show this animation picture of a pulsating silhouette of two figures under the sheets in a heart-shaped light with kissing noises, giggling, and music. Now, my young brain processed that as kissing a lot in the dark baby in the stomach. I kind of knew before the talk when I'd watch animals mating rituals out of curiosity, and eventually got the gist of it. Story 14. I always knew they came from moms. I never believed in the stork claim, but I think my parents just didn't tell me and always told me they came from mom's belly. But I always thought it was heavy makeout sessions. Ironically, I knew the idea of intimacy was a thing, but it still didn't correlate that intimacy leads to babies, just heavy makeout. Story 15. I thought a baby just kinda spawned in there, LOL. I asked my boyfriend this question about a month ago, and he said he used to think that at a wedding, the baby spawned when the couple had their kiss, LOL. Story 16. I always knew where babies came from. My mom had the talk with us when we were very little. I think it's a great idea, and I'm going to do that with my kids. Not only is it good for kids to learn about their bodies, and it's before things get embarrassing and awkward, but later my mom told me a big reason she did it was if we were ever intimacy assaulted, we could explain what happened. Story 17. I put zero thought into it. I had heard of intimacy, but I had no idea what it was. Had no idea babies came from it and would just call it sex, like it was a bad word, LOL. Didn't know why it was a bad word, just knew it was. Story 18. I have probably the weirdest one. I thought that when people get so old, they pop them up like a balloon, and they shrink too, became babies. Probably cause I never saw a pregnant woman in that age or never noticed. I probably thought she is just overweight. Story 19. I don't remember what I thought, but kids at school would say that babies came out of their mom's boobs. which explained why boobs got so large during pregnancy. I don't think I ever actually believed it though, but lots of kids did. Story 20. We were given the excellent, very descriptive, How Babies Are Made book when I was 4, and my sister was 6. We were asking, Mom told us. The book explained more. We had more cues. Mom gave more answers. Until then, we had been told moms and dads loved each other so much that they kissed and hugged and wished for a baby. Then, if they were very lucky, they got one. Story 21. I did not know, and I did not care as a little girl. I had assumed at some point in every woman's life, you just eventually fell pregnant, and that fudge terrified me because I dislike the idea of babies. I remember being so concerned for my very single aunt because she was around the normal pregnant lady age, 30s, in my simple kid brain. Story 22. We were watching Lassie on TV and she showed up with puppies. Brother and I, probably 6 and 8 others, old figured out Lassie scratched her stomach open on a rock and out came the pups. Our parents were sitting there and said nothing. We didn't think about the wound or how she would avoid infection. Story 23. Well, as a child, I was told 2 people need to marry and pray to have a baby. Then when I grew up, I thought if you kiss and go under the sheets, you get a baby. OMG. And then I was told they need to have intimacy to have a baby. At that time, I thought intimacy was pumping twice and magically you have a baby. This last thought was when I was 25. Yes, I was too innocent. Story 24. Come to think of it, I honestly have no idea what I thought. That feels a little weird. I got caught in the umbilical cord during birth and was born by emergency C-section. I was very aware of that aspect well before it ever occurred to me to wonder about what came before that. There are a lot of pictures of me still all bloody and I think still attached. Apparently, someone correctly guessed that using his camera would keep my dad from fainting. I'm old enough that his reaction has always been attributed to Nom flashbacks. Story 25. I knew mommies got pregnant for as far back as I have memories, but the methodology of how that happened was a mystery to me. My parents divorced when I was 3, and I hardly have any memories of my birth father, so it never really occurred to me that a man was a necessary piece of the equation. I guess I never really thought about it too much. I knew it was something people wanted sometimes, and that it happened accidentally sometimes, but I always thought that it kind of just happened when someone wanted a baby. I think I was about 7 when I first asked my mom what intimacy was. I must have heard it from someone at school I don't even remember. She explained the very basic mechanics of it, but not any side effects of it. I thought it made sense because I obviously knew boys and girls had different parts, and it made sense that they were supposed to go together. But I still didn't make the connection that babies came from that process. I think it took another year or 2 for the birds and the bees to finally come together for me. I specifically remember being in 4th grade and explaining it to a friend I had made that year, so sometime before that I either made the connection or someone told me or something. This would have been in the mid-90s, so I don't think I would have had the capacity to look it up myself yet. Story 26. I weirdly did not think about it. I knew they grew inside a mom and it was separate than a normal stomach, but I just left it at that. Considering I was a curious child and questioned literally everything else to an unbearable degree, it is strange I did not question this. I think probably because growing up, most of my relatives who got pregnant ended up losing it. So I overheard a lot about stillbirths and miscarriages and visited graves for cousins I didn't even know existed. I also knew I was a very premature emergency C-section and that both me and my mom almost died ourselves. So I Think kid me just associated pregnancy with bad things and passing and never wanted to know more. Story 27. I never even had time to think about it. Mom got me a comic book-style intimacy ed book, narrated by a bird and a bee when I turned like 5 or 6. I read it on my own, and it didn't leave me with any questions about it. Story 28. I actually knew about egg and sperm cells. Why? Before I knew about where they are in the body. First or second grade, maybe earlier. So I just thought a singular sperm cell would cross over during a kiss, but only if the father wills it to. It'd go inside the egg cell, and a baby would start to grow in an unknown area somewhere in the mother's abdomen. Story 29. I thought babies were just store-bought and put together like IKEA furniture. In my mind, a baby's parents got to pick out their features separately at a store, and they came home to make them to their liking. This was because when I asked my parents where I came from, they told me they made me. I imagined them putting me together just like the couch they had just assembled. Story 30. I grew up in a very Muslim household, but also had far too much access to the internet, so I knew intimacy was a thing quite young, but also thought that Muslim people didn't have it, and that God just decided when. Or like if he thought you deserved a child, you'd get pregnant. Found out when I was like 13 that, no, in fact, everyone had intimacy through a dictionary, when all the boys were giggling over it. Pretty sure I tried to convince them they were wrong as well. Story 31. I had a younger sibling born shortly after me, so I was always aware of the pregnancy thing, but how one got pregnant wasn't explained. At the time, I thought only married people had babies together, so I think I just decided that there must be some secret step in a wedding ritual that switched on the baby-generating power in the wife. I thought maybe like a spell or a special drink or something that told the wife's body that she's married and can now be pregnant. Story 32. I thought a guy and a girl just laid on each other stiffly and then kissed once LMAO. Thankfully, when I was like 5, 6, my mom got me a Birds and the Bees book that explained everything. Never had the talk, just the books. My teachers were definitely concerned when I wrote book reports on that book, though. Story 33. I don't remember not knowing that a woman carried a baby in her body before giving birth to it. I do remember thinking that once you were married, conception happened spontaneously. I don't know why I thought marriage vows were directly responsible for a biological process, but it made sense until age 10. Story 34. I walked in on my mom changing and asked why she had a giant scar on her belly. Keep in mind, this was the vertical one they used back in the 80s. She didn't hesitate to inform me of my origins. Convincing the kids at school that they didn't have an avian origin was another topic altogether. Who knew 5 to 6-year-olds could have an existential crisis? Story 35. Found it a pretty weird way. You see, I discovered adult content on white when I was in 1st grade, but never thought babies come from intimacy. Then came to know about sperm and eggs from a Bollywood movie. Then thought that when a guy kisses a girl, sperm cells transfer from his saliva in girl's body. But I always knew I was wrong because I learned about intimacy shortly after, but still didn't know how sperms actually came in female body. I used to wonder if men pee in the female body part or something like that. Then I came in 8th grade, and from my textbook I found out that we ejaculate in females and all that shoot. So, yeah, that was it. Story 36. I don't know, my parents weren't exactly euphemistic about it. They did leave out some details until I was older, but I did know babies grew in the mom and came out the female body part for as long as I can remember. Story 37. I knew they came from a mom, and I knew they came from intimacy when the sperm finds an egg. But for all the biological diagrams, I didn't have any actual idea what intimacy was. I remember my complete shock and disbelief when I found out the male body part went inside the female body part. I thought it was like a water gun or something. Story 38. Stork brought them and let them slide down the chimney. When my mom was pregnant with my younger sibling, I kept checking the fireplace. Then winter came and my parents started using the fireplace. Stressed me out, thinking they're going to burn the baby. Story 39. I never thought about it. I was too busy thinking about crap like, am I the only person with consciousness and everyone else is fake and only here to convince me reality is real? And do we all see color the same? If we looked at the same cup, do we both see green, or am I seeing green and you're seeing purple? Also, a bit of, is there any way I could focus really hard and shut off my senses, change reality while it's not being observed, then focus back on reality and cement my changes? I was a very weird kid with no friends. Story 40. My father was and still is terrified to even hear the word intimacy, so I got a whopper of a lie. He said they asked God for a baby, and then he went out into the woods behind the house and found me by a stump. He said a stork left me there. Now I don't believe in storks or God. Way to go, Pops. Story 41. I thought intimacy was a blowjob because you'd swallow and the sperm would go to your tummy, and pregnant ladies always had babies in their tummies. Then I assumed that you pooped them out. Then I did a first aid course when I was 10, and the manual had a section on birth with illustrations and diagrams. Story 42. I asked too much when I was about 4, and my mother was pregnant with my younger brother. By the time she started evading, I'd got to the point where she told me that babies came from the mother's tummy. I asked if there was a third hole, and she evaded. And I never forgot that evasion. It set the standard for things I couldn't ask my mother. At 7, Sonia Whaley showed me the whole setup and explained what she knew of it. I asked her if she thought they were supposed to fit together. She didn't know how that would work, and neither of us had any interest in trying that out. We both had our answers. And our curiosity was satisfied. I never even thought about it more until I was in my teens and wondered where she went when we both moved away. She was my best friend's twin and set my standard for what I like in girls. Long dark hair and sharp as a tack. Story 43. It just happened. Like you wanted a baby, and just like that, you have a baby. I was young when my sister had her first and always wondered how it happened, especially because her boyfriend was never around. Story 44. I thought you'd press the belly button and it'd come out on a little tray. My thinking was that if it's called a belly button, something must happen when you press it. I also distinctly remember being horrified upon learning that babies are born without clothes. Up until then, about the age of 6, I was convinced that while growing in the belly, the baby grew itself a baby grow. Story 45. I literally thought women just popped up pregnant randomly in their life without a man. I just thought at some point in their life the universe would just decide it's time to be pregnant. I was always worried when I was little because I was like, what if the universe decides I don't get to be pregnant? As for how I actually thought they were born, I just thought they came out of the belly button. Story 46. I didn't really think much of it, but I had 2 theories. The stork, which is pretty common, and I had Yoshi's Island for the DS, so not too out of left field. They simply pop into existence out of thin air. However, I watched Revenge of the Sith a crap ton of times during childhood for me to eventually figured out they at least come from a woman. Story 47. I was a big animal nerd and watched a lot of Animal Planet. I knew storks didn't deliver, otherwise David Attenborough would have mentioned it. I've also knew they came in Mom's stomach and had a sort of idea from animal documentaries, but never really put the two and two together until Mom sat me down to explain it. Was weird, but I liked learning, so I said, cool, and had that needed context to other animal documentaries, ha ha. Story 48. I figured it happened after you got married, like you just get pregnant at some point. I didn't know of anyone who had babies without being married. I was really into animal books as a kid, so I actually did know what intimacy mating was from one of them. However, I thought that it wasn't something that humans did. I thought humans were special and just got pregnant. One day, though, I think I was about 9 or 10, and I was thinking to myself, it's weird that humans don't mate. Then I thought about it a bit longer and realized I had no evidence to suggest that this was actually the case. I came to the conclusion that humans actually did do that too. I was at the grocery store with my mom, internally realizing where babies actually came from, LOL. Story 49. I'm an oldest sibling, so I knew about pregnancy being the source of new babies, but I was under the impression that sleeping together was literal, and it would somehow happen if a man and a woman slept in the same bed. I remember having a sleepover with my cousin and insisting on sleeping on the floor, LOL. Story 50. Man and woman kissed deeply. One of the man's testicles traveled up his throat, into the woman's mouth, and she swallowed it. This was a short-lived theory once I remembered I had 2 younger brothers. Story 51. I feel like I always knew where, but I thought I now pronounce you man and wife part of the wedding. Did it, LOL? Then I found out I was a year old when my parents got married, so I went on to believing it was kissing naked in water. Because of a music video I saw one time. Story 52. I didn't really know how at all until it was from intimacy, but as a very small kid, 3 and a half, I remember asking my mother, "How did sister's name get into your tummy?" And she just said Dad put her in there, and I said, "How?" And she said he just put her in there, and I said, "Yeah, but how?" And I forgot about for the most part until I really learned how.